her virginity at a younger age than I had. I usually guessed wrong. The middle-aged former prostitute with the bleached blonde hair and leathery tan, who lingered in my office and wondered aloud how she would explain the 12-year gap in her resume to potential employers, had been with very few partners in the previous year. The young woman who showed up wearing nylons in the middle of summer and looking as if she were there for a job interview had lost her virginity at an age when I was still having slumber parties. In addition to taking medical histories, I administered hormone injections for birth control, described the benefits of the IUD, and once explained the 3 bases to a nervous boy who called the clinic after school and asked questions in a high-pitched voice. But the most dramatic part of the job was administering pregnancy tests. I could tell from a patient's eyes as she handed me her urine sample how she felt about possibly being pregnant. While she sat in the waiting room, I stood in the tiny laboratory, waiting to see whether the thin pink line on the dipstick would appear. First faint, then staining the white tip darker and darker, marking a permanent boundary between before and after. I'd called the woman back into my office, maneuvering the folding door shut to provide an illusion of privacy. Most clients I saw did not want to be pregnant. When I confirmed their pregnancies, they sighed heavily and held their faces in their hands. I learned to sit in that confined space with a crying stranger, to hand her a tissue without saying anything. With their copious tears and unpredictable reactions, these women made me anxious, and I was grateful for the color-coded information sheets I could hand them. Purple for adoption, blue for abortion, green for prenatal care, pink for Medicaid information. As I outlined their options and helped them set up appointments, I spoke in the language of the clinic. Clear, conscious choice. Intended pregnancy. Every child a wanted child. I liked the sound of these words, the way they seemed to cut through the churning, murky waters of these clients' lives like an anchor, solid and certain. I wholeheartedly believed the gospel I shared in the counseling room, that if we planned carefully and made responsible decisions, we could create the lives we wanted. Still, I was often baffled by the women's choices. A married woman who tenderly held her squirming toddler on her lap, kissing the top of his head absent-mindedly, requested an appointment for an abortion without a moment's hesitation. A schoolgirl dropped her backpack on the floor, rubbed her fists into her eyes, then asked about prenatal care. Day after day, I counseled young women who stared blankly at me through their tears. Whether I was telling them about the adoption process, or how to get on Medicaid, or how an abortion was performed, I always assured them that they would be fine. Like a preacher describing the gates of heaven, I relied heavily on my imagination to comfort these women. In truth, I had no idea how it felt to be confronted with such a decision. I didn't even know how to set a clear, intentional course for my own life, which at that time was very much like my surfing. Though every once in a while I found myself in just the right place at the right time, and all uncertainty dissolved in the exhilaration of the moment, more often I was off balance, trying to find my feet in a world constantly in motion. Usually, I found my feet too late, just as the wave buckled over my head, or I stood up in the wrong place and the tip of my board took a nosedive, jettisoning me into the water while 50 pounds of fiberglass whipped dangerously close to my head. Sometimes, I didn't even see the wave coming until it was crashing down on me. When my father came to visit, I picked him up from the airport in my car that belched exhaust and smelled of musty wetsuits and towels. I drove him back to my cramped apartment and searched my kitchen for something to offer him, finding only granola, black coffee, and a half-eaten pint of ice cream. As we walked along the beach, he looked into my sunburned face. "If you ever want to do anything with your life, you'll need to move away from the ocean." I was beginning to think he was right. At work, I was tired of repeating the same words day after day to women who seemed to look right through me. I was dating a man whose bed sheets were always gritty with sand and who lived in a tiny beach apartment like mine and didn't own enough dishes to serve a meal for 2. While my college friends were continuing their educations or getting married, I was saving my pennies for trips to Baja and Hawaii to surf. I was tired of being broke all the time and building a life around the fleeting pleasure of riding a wave. I had decided to apply to graduate school to study journalism, a field that would allow me to indulge my appetite for a good story. When I was offered a scholarship, I gave away my surfboard and drove across the country to the inland college town of Chapel Hill. In North Carolina, I missed the ocean. But less than a mile from my new house, I discovered a network of running trails that snaked through the woods alongside a creek. I ran for miles beneath a dense canopy of leaves, losing myself in the rhythm of my breath the same way I'd lost myself in the motion of the waves.